Hi folks, welcome to November's wrap-up. And let me first cover a couple of non-runners I didn't get to. The first was Ian McDonald's Carino, which is the sequel to Chaga, which I think was published as Evolutionary Shore in the US, and I just ran out of time, so that's going to have to go back on the shelves. Along with In War Times by Kathleen Ann Goonan, which is a book on the 101 best novels list by Broderick and De Filippo's list of great science fiction books, and again this one I just ran out of time, so those two will live to fight another day. And I did not finish, but I have started, I'm a bit over halfway through Dead Girls by Richard Calder, which again is on the Broderick and De Filippo list, and I'm enjoying it. It's kind of cyberpunk infected Blade Runner flavours, kind of, but a little bit off kilter and a bit strange, honestly, but so far I'm enjoying what I'm reading. I'm going to give you my thoughts on the books that I've read in the order that I read them, and then we're going to rank them mercilessly as we go and ultimately declare a book of the month. So stick around to see if you can figure out what it's going to be. First book that I read in November was Anti-Ice by Stephen Baxter, and I've been wanting to read this for a little while, and I think overall it was a lot of fun. Baxter in this book is channeling his inner Jules Verne. We're in the 1870s-ish, maybe a bit later, England for the most part. Anti-Ice has been discovered by Victorian Britain, and the Brits have complete control of the source, which seems to be a fragment of a passing planetoid or comet that's crash-landed in Antarctica at some point in the past. The properties of anti-ice are such that when it's cold, it's inert, but when it's heated, even just warmed, huge energies are released, something along the lines of nuclear fission. The Brits have used anti-ice to end the Crimean War in a sobering and dramatic demonstration of the power of anti-ice weapons, and have also used it to supercharge the Industrial Revolution. Anti-ice powered high-speed rail networks span Europe, and there's a pervading sense of good old-fashioned British superiority and their generous dollop of hubris that unfortunately goes with it. Ned Vickers is our protagonist, and he's a young diplomat. He's an attaché at the Foreign Office, and he's at the second Great Exhibition, which this time is in Manchester. And there Ned meets the famous industrialist Sir Josiah Traveller, who's the discoverer and chief exploiter of anti-ice so far. And he also meets Francoise, a beautiful French woman, and of course he falls head over heels in love with her, and she becomes something of a talisman for him as events during the rest of the book take control of his life. And we wonder from the off, though, if she is everything that she seems. Anti-Ice is a rollicking ride. Ned meets Francoise again at the launch of the Prince Albert, which is a land leviathan, a giant ocean liner-sized vessel that will walk astride the land. Calamity strikes, though, and Ned ends up in an out-of-control experimental spacecraft. And this is where things, I think, are at their most Vernian. This bullet-shaped ship is kitted out with all the comforts of a Pall Mall club, complete with a butler, brandy and a China dinner service. Various orbital adventures ensue, involving primitive leather and rubber spacesuits, unscheduled EVAs and pesky French saboteurs, of course, all via a trip to the moon. And actually Baxter slips in a brief space oddity to this visit to the moon, which seems to bear, honestly, little relation to the rest of the story, at least that I could detect. And that had distinctly Clarkian monolithic overtones. And on the surface, perhaps Anti-Ice is maybe a little bit silly, and you might wonder what Stephen Baxter is up to. This is not the rock-hard science fiction of his other early books. Well, I guess there's two things to consider there. Firstly, these days he's the co-chair, and has been for some time, of the H.G. Wells Society, so clearly has an abiding love for 19th century proto-science fiction. And secondly, the surface level story, which is maybe a bit silly, it's really just a vehicle, a critique of the great game of national dominance and the futility of superweapons such as anti-ice allows, and the waste of war in general, the danger of nationalism and of manifest destiny, and the short-sightedness, sounding familiar at all, of basing your entire economy on a limited resource. And I think Baxter handles that mix quite well, and I enjoyed my time with this book. I give Anti-Ice 7 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. Next up was The End of Eternity, and this is a time travel tale chock full of paradox and meddling interference, and not a little love and misunderstanding to boot. The eternity of the title is an organisation dedicated to intervening in mankind's past in order to smooth out the future. And the results of such interventions are plotted out carefully, and not a little skill goes into deciding the minimum necessary intervention and how to put it into effect. Eternity bases itself in our far future, thousands of centuries downstream. Andrew Harlan is our protagonist, and he's an Eternal, a skilled time technician, well used to ranging through past and present centuries, monitoring and altering the myriad cause and effect relationships. And that is until he falls victim to a phenomenon older than time itself, love. He meets Neuer. He's resentful at first, jealous even, but she works her magic on him, and he feels he has no choice other than to play fast and loose with the rules of his profession to ensure that they can have a life together. And that, I suppose, is really the emotional guts of the story. Harlan and Neuer's motives each seem pure, but what's really going on under the surface? Who ultimately is manipulating who? Asimov is often accused of being a little bit dry, but I didn't find that at all with The End of Eternity. I thought that Asimov did a great job dealing with the timey-wimey issues and the paradoxes, the effect of alterations made, and some of that was pleasingly mind-bending. The relationship between Harlan and Neuer, I thought, was done well, and we get what we think is a good understanding of the dynamic between them until it turns out that we don't. The stakes are way higher, it turns out, than these two living happily ever after. Nothing less than the future of the human race is at stake. And I thought that Asimov handled that well too, weaving that into the tale in a compelling and credible manner. So I really enjoyed it, probably a little bit more than I was expecting to. I give End of Eternity 8 out of 10. It's a stellar splendour. Next up was Ender's Shadow by Orson Scott Card, and in some respects this is an odd book, or at least it's an odd concept. Orson Scott Card in this book is retelling Ender's Game, the book for which he is perhaps most famous, this time from the perspective of Bean, Ender's friend and comrade in battle school, and in all that follows in the original Ender's Game book. And I say retelling, but it's really more of a reframing. Yes, the events that happened in Ender's Game all still happen, but they're often in the background and referred to only obliquely in this book. The opening third of the book is dedicated to Bean's hard-scrabble life as a small child back down on Earth. He's not much more than a baby, really, in the slums of Rotterdam. It's about how he survives, how he avoids being beaten up on a daily basis, how he becomes influential in a street gang that he's a member of, and yet still seems to be living on the very edge the whole time. The middle third is Bean's experience as a launchy at battle school. It's about his training, his faltering steps to becoming a confidant and supporter of Ender himself. It's about him overcoming his disadvantages with his primary advantage. Bean is super smart. Noticeably so, even amongst a cohort of kids with well above average intelligence. The final third of the book then gives us a Bean's eye view of the final battles and tees up the following books in the Shadow Saga. So what did I think? It's been years since I've read Ender's Game, but I recall enjoying it at the time, and I think it made it into my top 10 science fiction books ever the last time that I compiled that a couple of years ago. So I was kind of intrigued by how much I would be engaged by reading what I assumed would be the same story. But I found Bean to be a sympathetic character with significant issues to overcome. I enjoyed the kind of gut-wrenching scenes in Rotterdam. It all sounds very unpleasant. And Bean is special, and exactly how and why he's special are explained as the book unfolds. Then if I stop to think about it for too long, I did find it slightly implausible that a 4-year-old such as Bean could be as articulate and street smart as Bean appears to be, however special he's supposed to be. But still, the sections in Battle School are still good. There's a little bit of the practice and so on that featured large in Ender's Game. But Orson Scott Card doesn't repeat sequences for the sake of it, or at least I don't think so. Most of the time in Orbit is spent seeing Bean develop as a character as he begins to earn respect from his fellow launches. And I enjoyed spending time in Bean's head, and it was fun to see the degree to which Bean made it possible for Ender to succeed. Scenes which were all very much in the background in Ender's Game. So overall, I enjoyed my time. I give Ender's Shadow 7 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. Next up was Bee Speaker by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this is a new book out earlier this year. This is the third book in what we should probably now call a series that started with Dogs of War in 2017 and then continued with Bearhead in 2021, which was set a few decades down the road, mainly on Mars. And in Bee Speaker, where we've moved on even more, a couple of hundred years, perhaps a little bit more than that, we quickly learned that Mars has done all right for itself in the meantime. It's made progress a little bit, at least, with terraforming, and they've bootstrapped an entire economy into existence with the somewhat grudging help of bees, the distributed intelligence that has decamped to Mars during Bearhead. And they've needed to, because the Earth has gone dark, suffering a collapse and knocked back into, it seems, something approaching medieval feudalism. But a faint signal from Earth is detected, essentially a request for help, and ostensibly from another instance of bees. And the distress call is answered by Mars in the form of a 4-person team who land on Earth ready to help. Each of the Martians on board this ship is a twice modified human or a bioform. Firstly, been modified to exist on Mars, which is a harsh environment, and then further augmented to survive an extended trip on Earth with its higher gravity, amongst other issues. The team is a bioform dog called Wells, a bioform dragon sniper called Ire, and two more or less regular humans, Ada and Takuma. They home in on the signal, they land, and things quickly go pear-shaped as their naive plan to help an entire planet dissolves in the face of local realities on the ground, let's call them. And the book actually opens with one of the four Martians already dead, and with a monk from the local apiary delivering puppies to the factory, capital F, being tracked as he does so by the dragon sniper. There are relics of the high-tech old dotted around, much of it non-functional now, but a rare item does still work from time to time, and the factory still has the ability, albeit quite degraded, to turn puppies into dog bioforms, all of whom are subsequently controlled by an unseen entity called Factory Admin. I suppose the headline here is that I really love this book, and if pushed, I think I would say I liked it even more than Bearhead, and it might even give Dogs of War a run for its money in a fair fight. Beast Speaker is written so that it can be read on its own. Actually, all three of them are really. So if you haven't read the others, you could jump straight into Beast Speaker. Personally, having read the others, I do think it's probably better to have the first two under your belt. Just having that kind of background context helps to make sense of some of the references that there are in Beast Speaker. Regular viewers will know I'm fond of an end-of-the-world tale, and there are strong elements of that here, at least with the local society that we meet that are living on Earth, and it's regressed into a patchwork land of factions, battles and bunkers, witches, and priories. The world has very much moved on, with the monks of the apiary channeling their inner Leibowitz, preserving knowledge of the old under the protection, it seems, of yet another swarm of bees. As you might guess from the artwork and the title, bees features large in this book, although mostly in the last third of the book, and perhaps not quite in the way that we might expect if you are familiar with the other two books. I thought the women of this tale were excellent, quite a good mix of characters. There's Ada and Wells, there are the witches, there's the wives of the leaders of one particular bunker faction, the power behind the throne, if you like, all of them conspiring together to make the bad situation slowly less bad. Less uncivilized. So Beast Speaker really is a tale of unforeseen, unintended consequences. It's an adventure, it's a post-apocalyptic tale, it's a mission, it's a series of bluffs and double bluffs, and of coming together to fight a common foe. But Tchaikovsky knows how to tell a good story, of course, though I have found his books to be a little bit variable in quality, although generally speaking, definitely at the good end of the spectrum. And I think that Beast Speaker is one of his better ones, and I had a great time. I give Beast Speaker 9 out of 10. It's a galactic gem. Next up was The Prestige by Christopher Priest, which is the book, of course, that Christopher Nolan's movie was based upon. And there's a limit to what I can say about this book without dropping huge spoilers along the way. And so let's see how I get on. I will say that if you've seen the movie and have not yet read the book, then you really should. It's very well worth your while, I think. And that's the camp that I was in. I've seen the Nolan movie 2 or 3 times over the years, most recently actually just a couple of months ago, so it was fresh, relatively speaking, in my mind. So having seen the movie and having a pretty good grasp of the tricks and the gotchas that are in that version of this story, I can tell you that there is still much joy to be had in spotting the little clues and breadcrumbs that Christopher Priest leaves throughout the book. And I do think they're there too to be found by someone that was completely new to the story, even if you haven't seen the movie. But I do think you would need to be on your game to spot them. And I think if you've neither seen the movie or read the book, then you're in for a huge treat. I think possibly the biggest possible treat with this book. There's Christopher Priest's writing, of course, which is wonderful. And then there's the narrative flourishes, the magic tricks that he pulls off with the story. So what can I tell you about The Prestige? The book is about a feud between two music hall magicians operating in late 19th century England. Alfred Borden is one and Rupert Angier is the other. And they're both full of admiration for each other's skills and abilities as magicians and performers. But one fateful act of self-righteousness on the part of Borden at the expense of Angier's has most unfortunate consequences and sets in train decades of rivalry, a feud really, sometimes petty and sometimes deadly serious. Unlike the movie, the book has another thread, which is set in the 80s or 90s perhaps, which has deep connections to the main plotline, connections which are both thematic and familial. A London journalist is lured to a country estate under false pretences by a woman who claims to have known him as a child and to have witnessed events that are, on the face of it, impossible. Together they play sleuth to figure out what must have happened back in the day. Most of the action, though, is in turn-of-the-century London, as both Borden and Angier grow their careers and their reputations. Borden develops a new illusion that he calls the new transported man, to much acclaim and wealth, which involves him instantaneously disappearing and then reappearing on the other side of the stage. Angier cannot figure it out for the life of him, and this consumes him for years, requiring desperate measures up to and including espionage and attempts to duplicate the illusion, all while their feud plays out in the background with yet more drastic consequences for both of them. Priest in The Prestige makes much use of the structure of magic tricks in the book, both directly via exposition and in the narrative itself. The prestige of the title, we learn, is the ta-da moment at the end of a magic trick, the culmination of all the performance, the setup and the misdirection. And Priest is both describing illusions, giving us a magician's eye view of the mechanics of a trick, but he's also playing a trick, a literary sleight of hand on us, the reader, and actually several of them as the book progresses, and I thought that was very cleverly done. So The Prestige, it's a tale of intense rivalry, of secrets, of jealousy. It's also a mystery and ultimately, I thought, a horror story. And I shall say no more, lest I reveal something that I really shouldn't for those who are yet to read it. And that's my main advice, actually. If you haven't read it, read it. You won't regret it. I really loved it. I give The Prestige quite a rare 10 out of 10. It's a slam dunk galactic gem. Next up, I dipped into Cautionary Tales by Chelsea Quinn Yarborough, and this is a short story collection. I read about half of them, I think, but then I thought that with time running out, I thought I'd better switch to another novel from my TBR pile for the month. And these are stories from early in Chelsea Quinn Yarborough's career, all from the 1970s. And the standout for me was a story called Frog Pond, which describes a child on a fishing or frogging trip in their local pond, which we gradually come to realise is dangerously polluted and degraded. And whilst trapping contaminated frogs for the dinner table, she encounters a man who's fled the nearby city in search of somewhere safe to live. And this story was interesting for me, mainly for the note that Yarborough leaves at the end of the story, which reveals a link to a later novel, False Dawn, which was amongst my favourite reads in 2024. So I was intrigued by the stories in the book that I've read so far, and I will go back and read the rest at some point. So I don't consider it to be a DNF, even though I've only read half of the stories. But based on what I've read so far, I give Cautionary Tales 7 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. Next was Absolution Gap by Alistair Reynolds, and this I listened to on audiobook. And Absolution Gap is the third, arguably fourth, I suppose, if we include Chasm City, in the main Revelation Space sequence of novels. 20 or so years after the events in Redemption Arc, we find the refugees from Resurgam settled on Ararat, which is a pattern juggler world. Amongst the arresting images Reynolds gives us are the Sea Tower, which quickly turns out to be the kilometres-long Nostalgia for Infinity, which has been left standing in the ocean where it landed, tail down, massively taller than anything else on the planet. The relative peace and simplicity of the settlement on Ararat is disturbed by an arrival, an emergency capsule. Clavane suspects that it'll be Skade on board, his archenemy from the previous book. It turns out to be somebody else entirely, with an urgent message and very focused on recovering something very important to her, or rather someone important to her, that has been stolen. To add to the fun, the wolves are at the door again, and the community's days in safety on Ararat are quite severely numbered, it turns out. In the meantime, there's another thread on the moon, Hela, which is orbiting a gas giant with apparently miraculous properties. So miraculous, in fact, that the entire religions have been formed on this moon. And in an echo of Christopher Priest's Inverted World, a wagon train of cathedrals perambulates around the equator of Hela, all in an attempt to keep the gas giant directly above. The story of how Hela was discovered, the witnessing of the miracle, are the topic of a brief thread set some 100 years earlier. And this section was wonderfully baroque, involving an ultra ship's captain of particularly insane tastes and the squabbling, trapped people that serve her every whim. Some of those whims really quite unpleasant. Most of the action, though, takes place in two threads, one on Ararat and the surrounding system, and one on Hela, the moon, and they're separated by about 50 years. As a minority of those on Ararat manage to flee aboard the light hugger Nostalgia for Infinity, they resolve to head to Hela because they have some evidence or some advice that Hela will somehow reveal to them how the inhibitors might be, if not defeated exactly, then avoided. I really liked the two main plot threads in this book. I thought that the imagery on the Hela thread was excellent. The notion of a train of cathedrals was cool in itself. But also the lengths the faithful on board those cathedrals go in order to ensure that no further instances of the founding miracle are ever missed. One character in particular has his eyes pinned permanently open, and he's been genetically altered so that he never needs sleep. just so that he can always be looking at the gas giant. And I thought that the growing sense of jeopardy and hopelessness related to the inhibitors was done well, especially the scenes are set around Yellowstone, a location with which we're now familiar from the earlier books. I think Absolution Gap might be the best of the bunch for me so far. I give it 9 out of 10. It's another galactic gem. Next up was 400 Billion Stars by Paul Macaulay, and this is his debut novel. There are 2 other novels set in this same setting. Secret Harmonies was his second book, and that's set hundreds of years prior to the events of 400 Billion Stars, and I think can be read completely separately. And then there's Eternal Light, which is a direct sequel to this one, and you should probably read this one first before tackling that. The protagonist in 400 Billion Stars, and Eternal Light for that matter, is Dorothy Yoshida, and she's been press-ganged into a mission against her will to a planet that might hold the secret to victory against an alien enemy that humanity has been fighting in one particular star system. We gradually get some background information as the book progresses about the setting. There seems to have been an initial slower-than-light migration to the stars, driven by the major powers of the Northern Hemisphere. But those colonies, those settled worlds, were cut off from Earth hundreds of years ago as things fell apart back home, and only recently stitched back into something like a coherent whole by the invention of the phase gravel, a fancy doodad that allows faster-than-light travel. Something called the Greater Brazilian Federation is in charge of things back on Earth these days, and they boast now 12 colony planets to add to their estate. Dorothy is an empath. She can read people, she can get a sense of their thoughts and intentions, and this is her talent, a capital T, which we get the impression is something that's prevalent amongst the population. No, but this is her specific talent, and her skills are thought vital to understanding the locals on a particular planet. And that's why she's been sent. There's an existing survey team on this unsettled planet into which Yoshida must integrate herself. And the fundamental question is, what are the strange creatures up to? Who are the herders? What are they herding where? And more importantly, perhaps why? Is there a relationship, a connection between these simple seeming creatures and the relentless and fiercely secretive enemy about which we know so little? What is the significance of the giant flare of awareness that Yoshida experiences as her landing shuttle arrives? I really enjoyed the setting in 400 Billion Stars. I thought Yoshida as a character was great. She's dogged and determined and gradually pieces together what on earth is going on. I actually tried to read Eternal Light, the sequel to this book, last year, thinking that it was sufficiently standalone to allow that. But actually, I ended up putting it down fairly quickly, as there seemed to be a lot of references to past events, which I now think were covered in this book, 400 Billion Stars. I also recently read an early short story collection from the same author, The King of the Hill, which has several stories in it which are set in the same Federation setting, which I enjoyed at the time. And I enjoyed being back in this setting, and I'm keen to go back to Eternal Light soon. I give 400 Billion Stars 8 out of 10. It's a planetary pleasure. All of which means that my book of the month for November, and a contender, I think, for book of the year, perhaps, is The Prestige by Christopher Priest, which was a magical read and one that I heartily recommend, especially if you haven't seen the movie. That's everything. And as usual, thanks for watching. And until next time, goodbye for now.